It's all Bards. Oh, what a mess.
Welcome to the Barbecue, where the cast and creators of Oops All Bards grill each other about the most recent episode. I am your host and game master, Jillian Ashley Blair Ivy, but if you call me anything other than Jill, I am assuming that I am standing in line trying to renew my driver's license. Let's have the Bards at the table introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Ashley Banks, and I play Belle Cernamiel.
Hi, I'm Ross Curry. I play Andric Harrowhold.
And we're also joined by our producer, Nate Runkle. So we're a smaller group today, but we have a whole episode that we can talk about, episode 6 of Oops All Bards. Folks at home who have not listened to episode 6 definitely want to go back and listen to that before they listen to this episode. But just a quick recap, a reminder for anybody whose memory is not totally fresh on this. This was the episode where the bards that we've already come to know really link up with Cretaceous, our newest bard. There is some waiting to get on the train, some light espionage that happens on the train platform, as well as Belle and Kelonian working to create a distraction. Some kind of maybe suspicious activity from some of the porters around there. You all realize that you are riding first class, which is a novelty for some of you, but not all of you. And then while you're on the train, it lurches to a stop. And a porter comes and talks to Gideon about Gideon being in danger. And then the party starts to kind of split up and start to investigate. So that's where we are. And I want to start by talking about Belle, or Ashley as Belle, you and Bob as Kelonian put on a big song and dance number on the train platform.
Yes, we did.
So often in a D&D party, like a more balanced party, a party that's not all bards are used to create distractions like that. How does it work when you are an all bard party and you are creating a distraction?
You take the bard with the lowest intelligence score and put them on the distraction making.
Love it. So knowing that, what did you, Ashley, as a player, hope to accomplish? And what do you think Belle understood of her mission in creating this distraction?
I don't think Belle understood that there was a mission. I think Belle was fully in the mode of oh yeah, we're waiting for a train. Let's play some games. And I do think that it was yes, she was dancing and she was a distraction, but it was also very much she was trying to do the game where you jump in the circle, do a dance, somebody else jumps in the circle and does the same dance and then does something different, and you keep passing it around. But her party was not into that. So I do think she ended up pulling in other platform members.
Yes.
And just ended up I think Belle thought she was just having a great time, making friends, spreading a little joy around, and living life.
I mean, I think that is definitely what wound up happening. But at the same time, you did effectively create a bit of a distraction. And then Ross, Andric, and also with Clarice and Cretaceous, it gave you an opportunity to, you didn't really go anywhere per se, but you were able to kind of just speculate around. And you noticed some potentially sus activity from the porters.
Right.
I'd love to know at this point, not knowing anything beyond the fact that the train stops and there is a porter who comes to talk to you. What are you expecting right now?
We talked about this a little bit in the last barbecue in terms of at least my personal excitement for getting into this train sequence. But I Ross love Murder on the Orient Express and the Adventure Zone arc Murder on the Rockport Limited, the train sequence from Captain America. I was really excited to get into this train thing. And anytime you put a train there, you've got a confined space where, you're looking for, especially when it comes to a stop, that something has gone wrong. And suddenly everyone is a suspect. So a little bit of that was above table, but also Andric is a pretty suspicious being. And so I immediately and part of this is because I know my wife, I know Jill very well, and I know Jill's affinity for some of those same things that I just mentioned. I started going into Poirot mode. Really is where I was going.
So what are you expecting?
I don't know what to expect other than, someone seemingly innocuous is probably responsible for this, is my above table suspicion. But I'm looking forward to the process of trying to suss out who that is and what they're doing.
So let's talk a little bit about the train itself, because I told you in this episode, but we didn't quite get to this particular mechanic. Actually, we did once because Belle and Clarice went to go find snacks. And so moving between the trains, it triggers an acrobatics check while the train is in motion that you all have to pass. It's not a very high one, but if you don't pass it, you can take some damage moving between the trains. But then also, when the train eventually lurched to a stop, there is some damage that automatically came with that, because you're not going to be able to like really roll a check on that. It's going to happen. So you are in this machine that is neither friend nor foe, but has the potential to cause some damage to you. It's not quite a lair action like when you're fighting a big bad, but there is definitely something about the setting being potentially perilous that creates another element that you have to consider. So as players, like when you find yourselves in a setting like that, how does that play into the way that you are going through the encounter or through the setting?
I personally love this. This is, to go to not so much talking about our episode, but just general TTRPG stuff in general. Whenever you can make the environment or the terrain become part of the encounter and adding a level of complexity. For here, it's being in a confined space. If you can make terrain 3-dimensional so that there are things to climb up that you might slip off and fall down into, that makes both combat encounters and exploration and investigation much more interesting. And so I really liked one of the reasons I like the train thing is because you've got to work in tight quarters. You've got to figure out how you're going to move around both my allies and, again, the suspects, as it were. So I really like that dynamic.
Ashley, how did you feel about the potential for taking damage just by moving around the train?
Belle has a +10 to acrobatics.
And it was a DC 10, so it's no risk for you, really.
It was literally just, I guess it's a little bumpy, whatever. So I wasn't worried. No, I mean, I thought it was interesting, and I appreciate, like Ross said, I appreciate that it added a little bit of dynamic to just the act of moving around, and it doesn't prevent you from choosing to move from one car to another, right? But it prevents you from being really frivolous about it.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the train stops, and
you almost killed the chicken.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Unfortunately, Bob isn't here, but there was automatic damage that happened when the train stopped, because since the train lurched to a stop, there was no way that anybody was really going to have an opportunity to be prepared for that, to protect themselves in some way. So I'd made the decision that there was not a saving throw. You were just all going to take damage. And it wasn't a huge amount of damage. Although Clarice, I think, rolled and managed to roll the full damage. Yeah. And Gideon did too. But Bob is sitting here and says, does Angel have to roll for damage? I said, yeah, Angel's on the train. And everybody at the table just goes really quiet, because Angel's a real chicken. Angel is not a familiar, not some sort of mythical beast. Angel is a chicken, and chickens have 1 hit point in D&D. And I was not okay with killing Angel because the train lurched to a stop. Honestly, I hope that I don't have to kill Angel at all, because that would make me very sad. And I think that might get our podcast protested by PETA. But I made the decision that because Angel is so light, the force of the impact was not going to affect her in the same way. She's not going to like slam into something. It was just like she could do like a little gentle hop, and chickens can't really fly, but she could kind of flutter down and she'd be fine.
Yeah, sort of like if you have a balloon in a car and the car stops, the balloon just sort of bops around a little bit. It doesn't pop.
Exactly. You know, a chicken. I don't think we ever established how big Angel was, but like she's a small little hen. She's not a big like monstrosity that you've created, like that KFC has created to have like the biggest breasts and thighs possible. We were talking about like a little tiny hen that Keylonian found in the woods. And so I just made the decision, and I think DMs sometimes have to make decisions like this to like, yes, everybody is taking damage except for this beloved NPC.
Well, I think one of the first comments from episode 1, wasn't it like, I hope you guys don't kill that chicken or something like that? Yeah. I think that may have been a comment like one of our friends had made to us. It was like, I will stop listening if anything happens to that chicken. Yeah.
Ross and Ashley, you're both very experienced as DMs. Have you had to find yourselves in positions where like you have to make a decision like that to mitigate the damage to
play God?
Yes.
Well, and I was actually going to put this back to you. I've not had to do it with an animal companion. You know, I have had characters who have familiars before, and I do not hesitate to womp those familiars out of existence, because
they womp back.
The conjuring player just needs to, or the character that conjures them just needs to go like get some incense, do their ritual, and they can bamf back their familiar into existence. I haven't had to do it with an animal companion, but that experience, Joe, I was wondering if, well, actually, let me let Ashley answer first, and then I have a question to throw back to you.
Sure.
Yeah, I haven't had a chicken on a train situation per se. But I think I mentioned this in an earlier barbecue that like my first time I ran an encounter, I like vastly overestimated what my players could take on. So there were like way too many enemies, and I didn't know like the number of enemies also affects, it's not just
It's called action economy.
Yes. So I didn't know that. I was new. So like in the middle of the encounter, I was like, just kidding. Turns out that this guy's hit points are half of what they were, and these guys are scared, so they all ran away. And I think it's not exactly the same, but that vibe of like, you see what's about to happen, and you're like, on one hand, the joy of D&D is like, you don't necessarily know how things are going to go, right? The roll of the dice can change things. But at the end of the day, it's the DM's job to make sure that you're telling a fun story, right? It's a game. We're supposed to be enjoying it. And if the thing that is about to happen doesn't actually impact the story and is just going to make it a less fun time for everybody, right? It's like the opposite of the rule of cool, right? It's the rule of uncool. Like, nobody gains anything from the chicken dying because the train stopped. There's nothing lost from the chicken living. So clearly the right choice as a DM or a GM who is, ushering this story forward is to keep the chicken.
And that was what it ultimately came down to. I figured that losing Angel, especially in that way, was going to be just such a big bummer.
Yeah.
That it was going to really affect the timbre, not just of that episode, but like the rest of the campaign. So I wasn't going to let it happen.
Yeah.
Right. There's a huge difference between Angel biting it because a train screeched to a halt versus if we get into a big bad battle down the line and
the chicken is held hostage.
Or the big bad recognizes Angel as a potential leverage point against Keylonian and puts like, or just like tries to take Keylonian out of the battle by taking out Angel. That, and we talk in session 0 about like what we as players are willing to indulge, what we're comfortable with. There are tables at which, a big bad could take out Angel for the specific purpose of taking Colonian out of the fight, and that would at least make sense and be...
It would be relevant to the story.
Yeah.
Right.
Why are you giving her these ideas?
Because he knows that I will not kill animals if I can possibly avoid it.
But one of the things I wanted to ask you, though, is, is there a difference between, say, Angel and a player character? Like, as you're sitting at the GM table and at this GM seat at the table, Ashley and I think have both been in situations where you've got one of your player characters on 1 or 2 hit points, and you see the roll of the dice, and
you have to decide if you're going to lie or not.
And I don't. I'm not a fudger. I had a situation where I was like, one of my characters going down, and everyone's going to have to deal with that. And it was a really tough situation. It propelled the story forward in an interesting way, but like we had to stop the session because a character was gone.
Mm-hmm.
So from where you're sitting, it hasn't happened yet, but have you thought about that eventuality and what it might look like?
I mean, character death is on the table. You're an all bard party, so I haven't at this point like created any obstacles for you that should put you into truly mortal peril, but it can happen. I mean, like a natural one crossing over the train enough times like that. Some of you have few enough hit points that like that could be like you could just fall off the side of the moving train and die. But it's not my intention at this point. It's not to say that it's not a possibility or that it's not acceptable for me. I think the difference is that Angel is a companion that has not been able to like really make any decisions that would ultimately affect her fate. Angel is there because Keylonian brought her on board. And I didn't feel, aside, like the fact that she's a pet aside, I just didn't feel like I could say Angel's just been like on the receiving end of a couple of animal handling checks, and now Angel is going to like have to roll to survive. If one of the players was like, if somebody was playing a Kenku that was reskinned to be a giant chicken, and you got into battle and that player got to 0 hit points and then didn't roll enough death saving throws, like, yeah, that player would be dead. It's different when we're talking.
The character would be dead.
Yes.
Do not kill please do not kill your players.
Yes, the character, the PC would be dead.
It hasn't come up so far. And I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier about like, it's about the story, right? If a character that is in the party dies, that's part of the story. Right. If Angel dies, it's just a bummer. Like there's no actual reckoning. It's just going to make everybody depressed.
Right.
I'm now working on a screenplay in my head where people are playing a campaign where if your character dies, you die in real life.
Oh no.
It's like Nightmare on Elm Street except D&D.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I'll say this with the caveat of turfs can go all the way off a cliff, but I remember the moment reading the Harry Potter books when Hedwig dies, and that is very forceful, and it within the context of that story, it mattered. I would, and so like again, I don't anticipate something to happen to Angel in that way, but like that is the kind of way to take an animal companion and make their death
right.
Yeah, as opposed to the train stopped.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
It needs to be, and I think that's I know, Jill, you can correct me if I'm wrong, and Ross, as a DM, you can chime in too. But I think that's the difference. There is like, if there were a PC death that were just like, the train screeched to a halt, and somehow the rolls ended up just straight up killing Clarice. I don't think you would have done that. Right. Like you would have been like, okay, wait, we need to rethink this.
Yes.
Right. Because there's no story value to it. There's that's why we don't roll for falling meteors when we're walking through the woods.
Right.
We just
and that is not. We've talked about some things that are different between when we're playing for recording a podcast sake versus just playing at a table. This is something that is not different. I have the exact same attitude when I'm not recording
Yeah.
versus when I am, because even just when we're sitting around a table on Friday night with pizza and beer and playing our home game, that kind of mentality that the story still matters, that is very much
Right.
the way you play.
Right. And, I think in this case, like if Clarice was sitting on 1 hit point when that train lurched to a stop, I would have just done away with the mechanic that anybody's taking any damage.
Right.
Be like, everybody's
maybe
really rattled.
done a saving throw or something.
Something. Or it could have been like, because Clarice is on, if Clarice were like on a stretcher on the aisle, there's nothing for her to slam into. So,
right.
It's based on where everybody's positioned on the train. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the things though, like as a DM, you also have to decide on the fly.
It's also one of the things you have to take into account when you're dealing with an all bard party. And for example, to get into the weeds a little bit, you don't have a character, specifically a cleric, but I think there are a few other subclasses and other classes that have access to revivify.
Right.
We had talked earlier about the mechanic of moving between the train cars,
Mhm.
right? And I think if you roll a natural 1, you're going to make us take damage. You're not going to be like, your leg falls through the 2 things and you die.
Right.
And I think it's the same vibe there.
Yeah. There are some, I'm trying to remember. I think this is maybe a Brennan Lee Mulligan rule. There's some like other podcast streamer DM person who has a rule where like, yeah, hit points are a thing, but if you take the sort of damage where like if it's a headshot, and it's a significant amount of damage, we're not going to tally up the hit points. Like that person is missing their head, they're dead.
Yeah. Like
if you are walking across the train and you trip and your leg gets stuck and the train is still moving and your leg gets wrenched off, like you dead.
Right.
So yeah, like there is that to consider too. But I
think this feels like the inverse of that rule, which is like if you're not doing something that is actually like fighting a bad guy, or sometimes you have non-combat encounters where it's like somebody is making a big risk, like crossing over a gorge.
Uh-huh.
Like if you slip, you're gonna die.
Yeah.
Right. But like you're not gonna be rolling to move from one train car to another and then risk character death.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Thinking of the train thing, we're thinking of the moment when Bucky goes out the side of the train in Captain America.
But Bucky lives. That's all that matters. Because nobody wanted to kill Bucky either.
He's the chicken. He's Captain America's chicken.
At least in that movie.
Tell me I'm wrong.
So
you're not.
So you're saying we could have given Angel a mechanical wing?
Yes.
I'm saying that in season 2, there's nothing preventing us from having an Angel come back and have a mechanical wing.
I will take that under advisement.
You're welcome.
Also, Angel should also be responsible for killing Tony Stark's parents.
Amazing. So we're actually kind of running out of time for this episode, but I did just want to really quickly talk to you about we meet a porter that everybody is immediately suspicious of, and this has been a pattern with you all. You were suspicious when Cretaceous linked up with you at the beginning of this episode.
Okay, Belle wasn't, to be clear.
Andric, you were.
Of course.
But as bards, generally, like you're a friendly group. Where is this suspicion coming from?
It's coming from Andric and Clarice. That's the no, like Kelonian was chill.
Well, Kelonian is good friends with Cretaceous, so
yeah, Belle is chill. It's not coming from the bards as a group. It's coming from Andric, Mr. Pouty Pants, and Clarice. Sour is in her last name, Sauercloud. Like that's where it's coming from.
And I mean, I think there's been enough at this point recorded that audiences picked up that Clarice trades in secrets,
mm-hmm.
and Andric is from a family that lives on the outskirts, not necessarily of civilization, but lives in a pretty dangerous place, and is always very defensive minded. And I think the other thing that factors in here is that when we were first meeting Cretaceous on the platform, Andric had picked up something weird going on with the porters loading some of the cargo onto the train. So that is really where Andric's suspicion is coming from. It's really from the platform observation, not so much stuff that's happened so far on the train.
Okay. I have one last question, and it's actually for Nate. So we're recording this after we've recorded episodes 6 and 7. Episode 5, in our last barbecue, we talked about Ashley had to join us remotely on Zoom while everybody else was at the table. And then episodes 6 and 7, Anne, Clarice, was sick, and we made the decision, you and I, at the very last minute, not to try and do that thing again because it had created some technical issues. And so I ordered a microphone for Anne to pick up at Target first thing in the morning, and she had to drag herself out of bed to do that, and then we all recorded remotely. So Nate, now you get to edit these 2 episodes from Zoom. How are you feeling about that, buddy?
You're going to be surprised, but actually pretty good because everybody's on their own tracks and nothing should bleed over. So it should be the easiest edit I've had to do yet. I'm saying that now, having not edited it. So when it comes to that day and I text you, I was wrong, be prepared.
Noted. And I guess we'll see how episode 7 goes too. Because not to spoil anything for our audience, but there's a lot that's going down in the next episode.
That's right. But no, to that point though, like I did notice, like we've talked about it since then, but like recording over Zoom is something that has its benefits, it has its pros, and it has its cons. Like I said, the bleed over not being there is enormous because it's easy to take people out if they're kind of laughing or doing something, to make that kind of edit. But then also we lose the kind of glue that is being in person. We were talking last barbecue about Ashley, how interjecting becomes an issue and stuff like that because the slight delay or even just the kind of not knowing when to be able to jump in. So it tonally might feel a little different, but I think we put on a pretty darn good episode, if I do say myself.
And that's not just an editing thing. That's also a D&D thing, because so many of us really, I've played D&D for a long time, but got really into it during the pandemic and was running games by Zoom. And, Jill, I believe in the previous barbecue, had mentioned something about back of table energy, where, people are kind of like whispering, doing their own thing at the other end of the table from the DM that you get in person, which doesn't happen really on Zoom. And on Zoom, you can throw down a virtual map very easily and move tokens around. Jill and I are not going to go out and buy a bunch of like physical terrain to put down on the table. And in that way, running on Zoom is very easy. And you actually get to move the plot forward much more quickly when you're doing it remotely, but you do lose kind of the weird chaotic energy that happens when a bunch of goofballs are actually physically sitting at a table together.
Yeah, Zoom DMs are just not the same. All right, we're gonna stop there. Join us in 2 weeks for episode 7 of Oops All Bards, and 2 weeks after that for the barbecue, summarizing or recapping parts of episode 7 of Oops All Bards. As ever, I have been your host and game master, Jillian Ashley Blair Ivy. And on behalf of all of us here at Oops All Bards, thanks for listening.
Oops All Bards is created, GM'd, and directed by Jillian Ashley Blair Ivy. This episode was produced, edited, and sound designed by Nate Runkle. Oops All Bards stars Ashley Banks as Belle Sternamiel, Ann Coleman as Clarice Sauercloud, Ross Curry as Andric Harrowhold, Tage Sinha Das as Cretaceous Thunderthigh, and Bob Killian as Colonian Stumps. The Oops All Bards theme song is by Bob Killian, with additional lyrics by Jillian Ashley Blair Ivy. Oops All Bards is executive produced by The Porch Room. We are part of the Porch Room Network on Spreaker Prime. For more information, visit oopsallbards.com. Thanks, and be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to Oops All Bards on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your podcatcher of choice. And follow us on Instagram and YouTube at Oops All Bards. We'll see you next time.
Oops, it's all Bards. Oh, what a mess.
Another quality podcast from the Porch Room.